Cheating on my wife by mistake! I, Beck Randolph, am married to Mitzi Randolph, née Alton, and at the time this story was written had been married for 10 years. We were both 34 years old and had 2 children, ages 5 and 7. Mitzi's physique is not particularly remarkable, although I find her attractive. She has a slightly large body for her 5'5", 140 pounds, but since I like to eat, I consider that a positive rather than a negative. To me, she is pretty, and I have always found her attractive, but she is not someone that would make the average guy drool. She usually wears her hair short and brunette, but every now and then, she feels particularly adventurous and puts her hair extensions and brown lenses in her blue eyes, which tends to change her appearance dramatically. We needed some time away from work and the kids we love raising, but they were challenging and we needed a break. And since both sets of grandparents are 20 minutes from our house, we decided to take a 3-day weekend without the kids. The grandparents were willing to help. They each got to spend 2 days at our house with the kids, which included an overlap of about 12 hours. The overlap was not a problem as my parents got along very well with Mitzi and did not compete for the attention of the grandchildren. On the internet, Mitzi found a themed weekend at a mountain lodge. It wasn't really a resort, but rather a very large house that the organizer of the theme weekend rented with a cook, a maid, and 3 college-age guys who worked as bellhops and servers. The theme was 1960s rock bands. The women had to dress as someone from the Pleasure Seekers, the Ronettes, the Ace of Cups, or Goldie and the Gingerbreads. Guys had to dress as someone from the Beach Boys, the Byrds, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, or Jefferson Airplane, or the woman could be Gracie Slick. Those who wished to attend were encouraged to bring instruments, as well as a set of drums and a sound system. However, the weekend wasn't limited to guests performing in the guise of old-time rock bands. There was pool, horseback riding, skeet shooting, dance lessons, and numerous other activities. Obviously, the outfits were only necessary to cheer people up. Mitzi dressed up as Eileen Bidlingmeyer from the Pleasure Seekers, and I dressed up as Mike Love from the Beach Boys. Mitzi as Eileen looked great. I wanted to do it in the car, LOL. When we got to the lodge, there was a happy bunch of about 20 people already there, all in costume. Mike Love was the most normal of the all-male rock band members, but most of the guys had long wigs and mustaches and outrageous clothes. I carried a small surfboard as part of my costume. I was very proud of Mitzi. Although I knew nothing about the Pleasure Seekers before this trip, I learned that they were all hot, wore distinctive short dresses and false eyelashes during performances, and with her eyelashes, hair extensions, contacts, and tight short dress, she portrayed Eileen very well. By 11 p.m., Friday night, all 30 of the weekend's participants were in attendance, and it was a fun bunch. Various people took turns playing drums, some sang karaoke with backdrops of bands they were supposedly in, and others mingled, drank, and generally had fun. The party dragged on into the early hours of Saturday morning. Mitzi had a particularly hard day of travel preparations, so she went to bed around 1 hour in the morning. I drank more than I had since college, but I wasn't close to binge drinking, however. I was turned on by some of the rock artists, most of whom looked very good. Their ages probably ranged from 25 to 50. Finally, around 3 a.m., things started to quiet down and everyone went to their rooms. A Paul Cantor look-alike, Jefferson Airplane, and a Steve Katz wannabe, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, were both drunk and passed out. Many others were moving slowly. In my stupidity, instead of numbering the rooms, as would have been prudent, they were all named after mountains. The owner of the lodge must have been a real weirdo, because I had never heard of most of the mountains used as room names. They weren't simple or famous like Everest or Denali. I swear Mitzi told us our room was called something like Mana Peak, which of course I had never heard of, but it was easy to remember. Since the bellhops took our bags directly to our room, neither Mitzi nor I stayed there until it was time for bed. I walked all around the second floor, never finding its name. Luckily, the second room I approached on the third floor was called Macra Peak, which led me to believe I had just misheard it. I peeked into the room and saw her distinctive pleasure seeker's short dress on the rack. I closed the door and tiptoed into the room. I needed a shower and shampoo, and in the shower stall was a bottle of Herbal Essence's Rose Hip shampoo, one of Mitzi's favorites, which I figured she had brought from home. I quickly showered and shampooed and got into bed without clothes. The fact that Mitzi was naked didn't surprise me since, although she usually slept in a long t-shirt, she had promised me that we would have fun without the kids. In the pitch darkness of the room, Mitzi lay with her back to me. I pressed myself against her, and she seemed to unconsciously respond by moving her body to me again. She smelled really good, also because of the scent of Rose Hip shampoo in her hair. I was a little embarrassed that her hair was more than shoulder length, but I remembered that she'd gotten her hair extensions yesterday to be like Eileen. Mitzi must have been thrilled because she seemed to be constantly moving her body. Although I drank more than usual, it didn't affect my body's ability to respond to my wife's flirting. I kissed Mitzi's shoulder and longed for her body. It had been a long time since Mitzi and I had made love in the spoon position. I couldn't remember when exactly, though I knew the last time was before our 5-year-old was born. But I remembered how great it had been. This time brought back some wonderful old memories. After a very long time, I finally finished making love to her. As I leaned over and kissed her neck and stroked her arms, life flashed before my eyes when a high-pitched voice said, "Oh, Alan, that was so amazing, darling. After your vacation, will you make me a concubine?" My name is not Alan, but Beck, and Mitzi's voice is not high, but husky. Suddenly, all those times I've mocked up stories of mistakenly having sex with someone who isn't your wife, thinking she is, popped into my brain. What? Did that just happen? Was endlessly swirling around in my head. There was no way I was going to let the woman I had just had sex with know it wasn't Alan. I continued stroking her, eventually moving my hand to her right breast, trying to fool myself that it was just to keep her turned away from me. However, actually stroking and lightly tingling her breasts was very arousing. Her breasts weren't much different in size from Mitzi's, though. After I kissed the mystery woman's neck some more and played with her breasts, she started moving towards me again. "Time to get busy with my concubine," she giggled sleepily, and then rolled over onto her stomach. I would never intentionally cheat on Mitzi, but I convinced myself that I should perform again to make sure I wasn't discovered, because I was sure she would accuse me of being used if she found out. So I humbled myself and had sex more willingly than I could remember. Afterward, I lay down next to her and lightly stroked her body until I heard her start to snore. That was my cue to get the hell out of there. I quickly got dressed, opened the door enough to slip outside, and then started looking for Mana Peak, wondering why the owner was stupid enough to call one room Mana Peak and the other room by the very similar name, Marka Peak. However, when I had already started down the hallway, I heard someone stomping down the stairs. I hid in the janitor's closet and looked out. There, stumbling around, was a drunken Paul Cantor wannabe standing there, looking intently at the names of the rooms. When he saw Macra Peak, he walked in, not too quietly. I hoped it wasn't loud enough to wake the mystery woman. Obviously, Cantor's wife. Once the door to Macra Peak closed, I continued down the hallway, looking up the names of the rooms. Mana Peak was the last one on the north side of the hallway. When I walked in, there was a tight Mitzi dress hanging there, but I wasn't going to be fooled by it alone. I looked around some more and found my distinctive suitcase in the corner. I took another shower, with the same Herbal Essence Rose Hips shampoo in the shower stall that I had used at Marka Peak. I later learned that it was in all the shower stalls at the lodge. I snuck into bed, again with no clothes on, and found Mitzi with clothes on too. They say the mind is the most powerful organ. In my case, it was probably true. I was so energized by the A+ sex with the mystery woman that my body became a piece of titanium again after I pressed myself against Mitzi's body for just a couple minutes. Then, just as I had during my journey to Macra Peak, I was soon making love to my wife when she let out a series of appreciative grunts, not the chirping of the mystery woman that should have given her away. After an extremely satisfying O-sex, which Mitzi also clearly appreciated, I drifted into a deep sleep. The next morning, Mitzi was in a wonderful mood. She was telling me how much she had enjoyed the night's sex, something we hadn't done in a long time. My mood was more relaxed, although I pretended to be as awake as Mitzi. I didn't know exactly how I felt or how I should feel about last night. By the time breakfast was over and everyone was doing other things, I decided to just enjoy the feeling of euphoria from having phenomenal sex with a mystery woman and purge myself of the guilt. After breakfast, I did try to find out who the mystery woman was. Since people weren't in costume during the day, everyone had changed in the evening, I wasn't sure who the Paul Cantor wannabe was. The wife of the guy who looked most like him was taller than Mitzi by at least 5 inches, and also probably the most beautiful woman at the lodge. I couldn't believe she was the one I had mistaken for Mitzi. We had a great day outdoors, playing bridge with another couple, swimming, playing croquet, and more. When we changed into our rocker suits for dinner, I finally got confirmation of who the mystery woman I had sex with was. She mimicked Arlene Quattro from the band The Pleasure Seekers and was wearing a dress I'd seen on the gallows at Mark Peak. It was a different color than Mitzi's dress and had a few other subtle differences that were too subtle for a clueless guy like me, and not enough color difference to be noticeable in a dark room. The one who looked like Arlene Quattro was a woman who was taller than Mitzi by at least 5 inches and the best-looking one at the resort. Her name was Alice Thompson, and her husband, a Paul Cantor wannabe, was Alan Thompson. He was 30 years old. She was 26. Since both Alice and Mitzi were dressed as pleasure seekers, Mitzi and I sat next to Alan and Alice at dinner and had fun with them afterward. Mitzi and Alice seemed to really like each other. I was embarrassed by my reaction to Alice, which was a fevered brain. That night after dinner, we drank a lot again. I tried to stay away from Alice for fear of being caught peeping at her and not wanting to be caught. At one point, after many of the guests had wilted, I walked over to where Mitzi, Alice, and the 2 wannabe Goldie and Biscuit were having an intense, albeit light-hearted discussion. I managed to stealthily get close enough to them to eavesdrop. In fact, I regretted not eavesdropping. While something flattering was said, it was also frightening to the point of horrifying. Although I don't remember the exact words, I'll never forget the gist of it. Alice. Last night, Alan gave me 2 of the best sex sessions I can remember and then totally insulted me by not remembering them the next morning. I know he was drunk, but my God, how can a guy not remember 2 great sex sessions, especially considering I'm not on birth control pills right now? We were planning to conceive this weekend and he doesn't even remember doing it. Although Alice's words scared the hell out of me, they had another strange effect. Inspired by Alice, both Saturday and Sunday night, I made love to Mitzi when we first went to bed, and then again in the middle of the night. When everyone left on Monday morning, there were smiles all around. Everyone had had a great time. I was the most satisfied I can ever remember being, and Mitzi was literally glowing. However, at the same time, I was scared. It didn't help that when Alice hugged me tightly goodbye, I pulled my pants up so quickly and vigorously that it was a miracle I hadn't unzipped my zipper. I started to sweat when she obviously noticed my reaction and adopted a very strange look on her face, but thankfully Mitzi intervened with a big hug, and I shook Alan's hand and then got the hell out of there. That weekend turned out to be the best weekend of my and Mitzi's lives. After the weekend at the lodge, we became much more adventurous, much more passionate, and had sex much more often. Sometimes I felt a little guilty when I made love to Mitzi because my mind would go back to thoughts of sex with Alice, but I managed to deal with them without much guilt. One thing remained after the weekend at the lodge, more negative than positive. Mitzi and I had become Facebook friends with Alice and Alan and had been following her pregnancy and labor. I was very concerned when she gave birth to her baby boy Colin almost exactly 9 months after the lodge weekend. As I continued to follow Alice, Alan and their son Colin, joined 2 years later by younger brother Mason, I became more and more concerned. At 4 years old, Colin looked just like me at the same age. At 6, when Mason was 4, Colin looked nothing like Mason at all. I hoped that Alice and Alan never had a reason to do a DNA test on their children. I don't know the reason, and Mitzi never told me about it beforehand. But at some point, Alice asked Mitzi to post pictures of her and I when we were kids on Facebook, and Mitzi agreed. It had been about 6 months after Mitzi had posted our baby pictures on her Facebook page when she said to me, "I have good news." "What, honey?" I replied with a smile. "You remember Alice and Alan Thompson from our weekend at the lodge that we both followed on Facebook? They're coming to our town the week after this weekend, and I invited them to stay with us for 2 nights. Since we moved, we have plenty of room." Mitzi and I had gotten promotions at work, were making good money, and had recently bought a 6-bedroom house. "Wonderful, honey," I replied with my heart in my throat and a sudden ache in my stomach. The weekend when Alice, Alan, Colin, and Mason visited our house was the most stressful weekend of my life for 3 reasons. 1. Alice was hotter than a firecracker, or rather a stick of dynamite, even hotter than the weekend at the lodge, despite having given birth to 2 children in that time, with my traitorous body reacting accordingly. 2. I was afraid that Colin was my son, and worst of all, 3. I was afraid of being exposed as Colin's father. I have not been mentioned before. My height is 6 feet 5 inches, a foot 30 centimeters taller than Mitzi, but only 6 inches, 15 centimeters taller than Alice. Alice and Alan are practically the same height, 5 feet 11. I have blonde hair and blue eyes, while Alice has light brunette hair and blue eyes. Alan has black hair and brown eyes. Colin is in the 99th percentile of height for his age, 7 years old at the time of their visit, and has blonde hair and blue eyes. Mason has black hair and brown eyes and is average height for his age. I felt like I was kept carefree for most of the weekend, and overall it wasn't as bad as I expected, except for one point. I don't know how she did it, but at some point during the weekend, Alice talked me and her into going to the store together to get ice and some other supplies. The drive there was no problem at all. Before we got in the car on the way back, however, Alice suddenly pulled out of her purse a tampon and a test tube of the kind you see on TV crime scene investigation shows. "I need something from you before we get back, Beck," Alice said, holding out the tampon to me with a devilish grin on her face. "What's this?" meekly and stupidly I asked. "You've seen CSI on TV, Beck, and you know exactly what it is. I need a DNA sample, and I won't take no for an answer. Did you really think that having sex with me would have no consequences?" I timidly handed her the sample. The ride back was uneventful except for her statement. "If Colin turns out to be your son, I don't intend to tell anyone about it. I'll just need your medical records in case they have any bearing on his health in the future. You will provide them, won't you, Beck?" she asked with an even more devilish smirk than when she confronted me with the tampon and test tube. "What makes you think I could be his father?" I inquired disingenuously. "You've got to be kidding. Alan doesn't remember making love to me the first night at the lodge, but whenever you're near me, you're instantly attracted to me, just like now. And Colin looks just like you, and luckily Alan is too ignorant to realize it. If you're his father, will you send me the medical records?" she growled. I realized that being around her had put my pants back on, so I sighed and meekly replied, Okay, Alice." 2 weeks later, Alice called me into my office. After a brief small talk, she said in a sing-song, not angry voice, "I need those medical records, Beck. Send them to me in a package marked confidential to my office address." I did as requested, wondering how screwed up my life would become if Alice ever needed to use them. 2 weeks after I sent my medical records, I received a FedEx envelope in my office marked confidential. When I opened it, there were 3 very clear 812x 11-inch color photographs. The first was of Elise without clothes, with her hands on her hips. The second was Elise without clothes, head turned toward the camera, smiling. The third had her lying on the bed, with a contorted expression on her face. The episode with the exchange of confidential envelopes, combined with the memory of having sex with Alice, has had two predictable effects on me. The first effect, I daydream about making love to Alice almost every day when I look at the pictures she sent. The second predictable effect, I no longer ridicule stories about the guy who mistakenly slept with the woman he thought was his wife. The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.